We recently got a holiday card at church. It was addressed to the whole congregation, so I thought I would share it with you. It shows the year 2020 as if it were an online review, and it gets 1 star out of 5 with the comment, "I'd like a refund." I guess that about sums it up, doesn't it? In a March sermon, I tried to compare the pandemic to the terrorist attacks of 9/11. That analogy was short-lived. 2020 was a year like no other. I encouraged us to acknowledge the grief of all the people and activities we will be losing. In 2020, we learned a lot of new terms like doom scrolling, when you go ahead and scroll on your phone and read all those news articles, even though you know it's bad for your health. There's been this collective stress and how our normal routines have been disrupted, and they've given us this weird sense of time. When did it happen? 2 days ago, 2 weeks ago, or 2 months ago? When asked what day it is, you can always respond with Blur's Day. With it not safe to go out, people have been on virtual happy hours with friends around the block or around the world. We have become more familiar with terms we would rather never have gotten familiar with and rather not, like super spreader events, contact tracing, essential workers, flattening the curve, P.P.E, remote learning, and pods. Then there were the wildfires. And I'm not sure how many times throughout 2020 I said or heard the phrase uncertain times, or how often I begged for the simplicity of normalcy, whatever that is. From other clergy, I've heard a phrase often echoed, "Sunday used to be my favorite day of the week." The pandemic has disrupted our patterns, our very own ways of living out meaning. And let us not forget about all those we lost in 2020. Breonna Taylor, say her name. A young emergency room technician murdered in her home by police who were serving a botched no-knock warrant. Since the police didn't announce themselves, her boyfriend fired a shot from his legally owned handgun, while police returned fire 32 times. There was a $12 million settlement to her family, and some reforms have been made in Kentucky, yet the police officers involved had escaped any legal ramifications related to her death. George Floyd, say his name, whose breath was taken by a police officer so nonchalantly, so arrogantly, so ruthlessly, and so defiantly. Ahmaud Arbery, say his name, hunted down while jogging in a white neighborhood in Georgia. Vigilantes assumed that he was there to steal things. A scuffle ensued, and he was murdered. Rashard Brooks, say his name, killed by police after falling asleep in a Wendy's drive-thru in Atlanta. Jacob Blake, say his name, shot by a police officer 7 times in the back in front of his 3 children in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And closer to home, in Rochester, Daniel Prude, while having a psychotic episode, police officers placed a hood over his head and he suffocated to death. Police tried to cover this up for about 6 months. All these victims were Black. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of a legacy of slavery and white supremacy. Black and brown people are also more likely to die from COVID-19 than white people. And that is why we say collectively, Black lives matter. Things are not the way they are supposed to be. The world is not how it ought to be. Injustice prevails. It's why the songwriters write, the composers create, the poets preach, and why we enjoy films and novels. We want to make some narrative sense out of all this dissonance. I'm sure that we have learned a lot over this past year. For instance, being a homebody is okay, right? After a while, you get used to it. And what other option do we really have anyway? Seeing someone you know in the checkout line becomes an event. That is, if they can recognize you with your mask on. And if you really love to travel, you probably have explored some nearby state parks and state forests, and you realized you took for granted all the beauty that is nearby. As a church, I think we've learned a lot as well. We've learned the technological aspects of virtual worship. It might have been difficult and painful to learn, but it has opened up our congregation and our ministry across the country and really around the world. Videos of my sermons are posted on Facebook, and I even get comments from high school classmates and people I've never met before. And Zoom, with all its faults, works pretty well for small groups and committee meetings. The new terms of 2021 haven't been decided yet. I'm hopeful that they'll have something to do with a strong economy, travel restrictions being lifted, vacations, good health, and a stable presidency. But let's take this year and imagine it on our own terms and make it into what we can control and be mindfully aware. Now, New Year's is as good a time as ever for reflection and a time to look ahead. But I agree with Reverend Blanchard that the Roman calendar is a rather arbitrary marking. We can experience newness in many different ways, shapes, and forms, and at any time. Anytime, that is, we accept the past and take aim at the newness of the now and drink the fresh, sweet water of the present moment. Time accumulates in each of us. Its slate, though, is never blank. We simply cannot dismiss the past year, for it sticks on our boots like mud. We can't just say goodbye and good riddance and demand a refund. It is a peculiar ritual to flip the calendar and say goodbye to a bad year as if we're opening the door to a new epoch of health and happiness. This pandemic will persist, and it looks like locally it's only getting worse and worse. Despite this, and despite the persistence of racial injustice, we can commit to be present to the simple beauty of a smile and enjoy our breath as long as we shall have it. Breathing in this wonderful moment, we can smile and be free. Surely, We can have some hope in Joe Biden's presidency and vaccines, but progress is a tricky thing to have faith in. I can tell you with certainty, racism won't end in 2021. But this can be our time of change. For what we really want is peace, and what we really desire is happiness. And the progress of our own peace will only increase the more we are aware and the more we pay attention to the wild moments that are before us. Not by a new calendar or a new presidency, but by savoring the sips from our own well, the fresh, sweet, salvic water that our own inner hermit transforms into. We then can easily recognize a new year in July, or whenever we make the decision to live differently and know it is time to be awakened to a wellspring of water. Take and drink the most delicious water, the one in your cup right now. Find your hermit in a rock, a tree, a star, a new baby, or a beautiful sunset. Because 2021 may not be qualitatively better than 2020. Our logic may love the linear movement of time, but expectation can trap our happiness in a confined future. No years are good or bad. Just moments exist in all their plenty, in all their beauty. In a world full of injustice, we need not despair. Even in a worldwide pandemic, we can all enjoy the currency of snow. This week, I read 10 Mary Oliver poems. They were about prayer and nature, death and grief. And I, through reading them, was encouraged to pray, to give attention to and to revere all that is before me, and to even wed myself to wonder. Mary needed geese and grasshoppers, starlings and swans to communicate this. I can tell she never had children, so she never heard the wild calls of boys finding a Lego piece in the mud. She never saw purple rain boots walking through winter slush. She never had to pull hats back up again so they can see again. Just as Mary had her geese, her goldfinches, her grasshoppers, her hoppers, teaching her to pay attention, so we have our Legos, our rubber boots, and hats in need of pushing back to see the world again clearly. May we all stay awake like a Buddha so that we can remain serene in all the suffering of 2021. Remembering each day can be a New Year's. We can celebrate anytime we look boldly into the now, and anytime we steer the wheel of life, the rudder of the great ship before us, a new life is upon us. This is the day Let's take 2021 on our terms, being mindfully aware of today, the greatest day of our lives. Happy New Year, whenever that is for you, and blessed be.